This makes a very, very important point related to sustainability. Actions are much more important than words. So, you know, you come to this seminar and then you go out of here talking with all these fancy words, but if your actions are exactly the same as they were before, it won't make any difference. Thank you.
Dennis, thank you very much indeed for what I can only say was both sobering and stimulating. And I think that we are going to have a lot of questions from the audience. Are they being collected at the moment? Everybody writing down on their blue, pink, red, green pieces of paper? Dennis, may I start with a comment while those are being collected, please? And you said in a lecture that you gave some time ago about how important it was that you traveled and saw how, let's call them earlier civilizations or cultures. I can think of the Middle East, Afghanistan, Great Zimbabwe in Africa, sort of human beings who had better control over their environment than you have shown us that we in the 21st century have. Destroyed themselves, their environments, and in fact their entire way of life. I mean, for an supposedly intelligent mammal, that isn't a very clever thing to do. But if humans are so acquisitive, and if we are so selfish, and our politicians and we can't see further than the next 5 years, how does one go about mobilizing cultural change? I think there was an era when the Club of Rome was particularly influential, and so was Brundtland and others, where think tanks were the order of the day, and perhaps some policymakers took this very seriously. But what, may I ask you, what do we do to do cultural change?
You assume with this question that the situation is still under our control. I mean, that, you know, if we do something, we can move the ship in a different way. I'm not sure that's true. Of course, on the margin, we can always make things better than they would have been otherwise, but I no longer see any possibility of preserving, you know, more or less the current situation. Take climate change, for example. If we're not already there, we're very close to the point where the intrinsic endogenous feedback loops in the climate system have taken control, and it doesn't make any difference anymore what we do with Kyoto, because we're sitting there, you know, turning the CO2 emissions thing down while the natural systems are generating methane or CO2 or other greenhouse gases in volumes which are just enormously larger than anything we control. Now, that's not a counsel for inaction. It simply means we have to shift our sense about what the possibilities are. I think, so of course we need, as I said, we need to work on the universal and global problems. Fine, let's go for it. But don't imagine that that's going to solve the problem. Problems are coming. They're going to generate a lot of shocks and chaos, like Sandy in New York, for example, did. Like the drought is now doing in the United States. And our systems, our technical, our biological, our governance will be pulsed. And we know that when something is shocked like that, there's a brief interval of reflection and openness to new ideas. So probably not the answer you were looking for, but you know, what I'm doing is trying to understand where those windows of opportunity will be over the next few years and prepare now the policies or the people or the devices that will be useful to those people. I saw this with oil shocks in the United States. You know, when there's something like the Arab oil embargo, there'll be a few weeks where the senior leaders genuinely are trying to figure out what to do. But within a couple of weeks, for a variety of reasons, partly because of the pressure of a press which is not willing to accept "I don't know" as an answer, people announce what they're going to do, and at that point, the flexibility is basically lost, and they move into the mode of justifying whatever it is they've decided to do, and moving on. So then you've lost your opportunity there. So that's what I see as our possibilities now. And I think energy and climate will offer lots of opportunities for flexibility, but it's going to come not proactively, rather when people say, "Oh my goodness, that's not working. We need to do something else."
Do you think that's up to the politicians?
Do I think it's up to the politicians?
Well, I obviously agree with you, but if we're talking about a cultural change, either to react to things if we can no longer control them, and it would be better rather than worse reactions, let's put it that way, to whom does the ordinary voter turn? Okay.
It's hard to talk usefully about these things in the abstract because cultures and issues and leaders all differ a lot. But what I can generally say is, generally speaking, political leaders are not leading the charge. They rather look and see where things are going and then try to jump in front. So I move down the hierarchy a little bit. I don't try for leaders. Leaders have staff. Many of those staff are very smart, very dedicated, and quite open to discussion. And so when I'm trying to take advantage of one of these windows of opportunity, I work with the staff, the ones that are open and receptive to it, to help them understand. Because, my favorite picture of a congressman, which I have seen personally, this isn't just a myth. The congressman, having come from a busy day meeting with constituents and trying to raise money, racing down the hallway and with a staff person on each side and the congressperson saying, "Tell me again what I am going to do on this particular vote." Those are the people you're dealing with. So don't spend a lot of time trying to persuade the leaders. Work with their staff.
Yeah. I think that was what was really useful about the distinction between a universal and a global problem. But there are two questions here that speak to one another, and maybe it's a good one to begin with. And that is whether population is the key variable or not. Population, the key variable or not. Is it a matter of just too many people? You spoke about an ecological footprint, which is something that I'm quite keen on, but is it actually just numbers?
Of course, population and population growth exerts an influence at all levels. If you're married to somebody and your family has population growth, that has profound implications for your family. In Munich, a key issue is the fact that if you succeed in making the city more attractive, which you have, it's a beautiful, wonderful city in many ways, the result is going to be a lot of people move in and your population goes up, and that will happen as long as you're more attractive than your environment. And then population pressures will stop only when you've reached an equilibrium with the attractiveness of your environment, so at that level. But let's talk about the globe. Population growth is important at the global level, but not in the way that many people think. 100 million new Indian agricultural peasants actually have much less impact on climate or energy use or water, let's say global air pollution, than a couple hundred rich Americans. So it's not the absolute numbers of the people that's at issue here, but rather the total amount of energy and resources which are being mustered and pushed through the system. If you are adding to your population with the expectation that each of them is going to acquire the same material standards as the rich, then population is important. But it's because of its impact on the energy and material flows.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last, there's a set of questions I have here, and then I'll ask Libby to deal with hers. But there are 3 questions here that are about a belief in technology. I'll just read the one. What is your view of geoengineering and aluminium nanoparticles being sprayed into the stratosphere to manipulate the climate? Maybe scientific and technological progress would change the curves?
Okay. So, this isn't exactly playing fair, but I'm going to do it anyway. Let me point out, I have a degree in chemistry. I worked in an Atomic Energy Commission laboratory as a scientist. I have a doctorate from MIT, which is one of the world's leading technological institutions. I've sat on the boards of a number of high-tech young companies, some in Germany and some in the United States. And I was a tenured professor of engineering for many years. So I have some basis for imagining that I know something about technology. And then I have these economists or these philosophers coming to me and saying, you don't understand technology. You know, it's going to solve all of our problems. How can you be so stupid, they say to me. Well, sorry. Now let's talk about it. What do I understand about technology? I think 2 things here are extremely important to mention. Technology is not autonomous. It's not something that sits off in a room and sort of works on global problems, and then when it's solved one of them comes, you know, pushes it out the door. No. Technology comes out of research efforts. Big, long, multi-person, expensive research efforts. And who's providing the money for those? People who are worried about global problems, or people who are trying to use technology to satisfy their own goals? I'll give you a hint. In the United States, we spend more money, the pharmaceutical industry spends more money developing new drugs to grow hair on bald heads than it does to solve the HIV epidemic. Why? Bald people tend to be rich, so if you can get something for them, they'll pay high prices. HIV people tend to be poor, so if you do develop something for them, you're going to have to give it away. So more money is going into this. Most of the technology development money that's the biggest share in the United States is spent by the military. They're not trying to solve global problems. They're trying to develop innovative new ways of projecting force and reducing the cost of their force mechanisms and innovative ways of killing people. I mean, so this is not where you're going to find suddenly solutions to global problems. You know, if suppose I have a hammer. A hammer is a wonderful piece of technology, in theory, but it depends on how you use it. If I'm a carpenter and I want to build fine furniture, the hammer is fabulous. But if I'm a killer and I want to do damage to you, I can use the hammer to do that. So there's, you see that the hammer is not intrinsically good or intrinsically poor, it's a tool. And so you need to start thinking, what are the objectives of the person who is wielding the tool? That's the first thing. And the second thing is just to point out the delays. It's one thing for a scientist to come running out of the laboratory with a fabulous new discovery. That happens. I've done it myself, and it will happen in the future, I hope, inevitably. But once we have that thing, it can be hundreds of millions or billions of dollars and many years or decades before it comes over and starts to have widespread impact on society. You know, we tend to think about the iPhone, which seems like it came on very quick, but it came into an existing infrastructure and an existing set of habits and so forth. Much more interesting is to look, for example, at battery technology or innovative new drive mechanisms for automobiles. They'll come, but this is a process which is going to unfold over decades. So yes, technology will be helpful, you know, but we're dealing with immediate problems, and we shouldn't just sit here, you know, twiddling our thumbs, assuming that that technology over there is going to take care of these problems for us. If we know what we want to do, if we lay the groundwork for change, then some new technology will be helpful to us. But if we think we can just go along as we're going now, it won't.
Thank you. Libby, what have you got in your...
The real crunch that the first one asks is, isn't there a contradiction between building a resilient system and change? That's the first one. The second one is, what about the vested interests in change, particularly the philosophy of big business, the lobbyists, politicians, and the final one is, do you think we could still realise the great transformation towards sustainable ways of living, which I think is a question from someone who's saying they don't think they can. I hope that's a reasonable summary.
I'll start with the last question. Can we still realise the great transition to sustainable living? Absolutely. That's not the question. The question is, will that transition unfold through policies and changes that we initiate, or will it unfold through a set of crises and catastrophes that we desperately try to avoid without success? And as I said, when you're driving fast inside a factory building with a car, probably you don't do that, but I mean, you know, the image is clear anyway. You are going to stop. That's not the question. Will you stop or not? Yes, you will stop. We will stop. We will come back down into a balance with the natural systems. And the question is rather, who picks the way we do that? We still have the possibility to pick, but if we continue to deny the reality, then we just gradually lose it. Okay. Of course, my analysis was at a global level, so I start by thinking sort of globally, but this notion applies at every level. Certainly applies at the level of Munich. I mean, Munich is going to quit growing. Munich is going to quit getting more attractive at some point, and the question is, are you the ones who pick, or the system picks? Is resilience, does the concept of resilience contradict change? Well, here again, it's hard to say something. I can say something, but it's hard to say something meaningful at a very high level of abstraction. You need to really look at a specific situation. So, for example, my household, where I live with my wife, our household, the house, the land. We are working actively to make it more resilient. Now, what does that do about change? I don't know. I have to think about it. I could say, glibly, oh no, if you're resilient, then you don't worry about change. But I'm not confident of that. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I think maybe the important thing to say here is the change is coming, irrespective. If we become resilient or we don't become resilient, there is going to be change. I mean, they waited to make New York more resilient, but Sandy didn't wait. I mean, this is one thing just to keep in mind. We care a lot about climate change. Climate change doesn't care anything about us. It could care less. It's going to do whatever it's going to do. And it's not going to wait around for us to sort these things out.
Why should we do something now? And then another contrary position, and I will help you. I want to start changing the world tomorrow. Where do I start? And then two more on the subject of habits. How can we change our habits? Are the interests of the distributor unequal? And how do you change the habit of people that don't want to change, that don't care, etc.? One is
I should just store all these questions up and go home and build a big computer model and generate a lot of scenarios and publish another book, and then
I think a collage on the wall of the Carson Centre.
So this question: people always adapt, so why get upset about it? Let's just wait. Well, I mean, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Yes, they do adapt, But to say that you adapt to a problem doesn't mean that you like the situation afterwards. I mean, you know, if I'm driving very fast and then I hit a piece of ice, I do adapt to the ice. The way I do is by losing control and running into something, and then I stop. I did adapt to the ice, but I did it in a way which didn't leave either me or my car much better off for it. It would have been better to anticipate that I'm coming to the ice, slow down in order to keep my thing. Both of them are adaptation. One is relatively attractive and one is extremely unattractive. And those, that's sort of stupid example can be, you know, cited at any level. I mean, you know, I mean, so I think that should be a clear point. I mean, but it isn't. But it should be. So make it clear. Go think about it. That's, just a minute. I haven't finished these other 3 questions yet. How do you change the habits of somebody who doesn't want to change? Don't. Forget about it. You're not going to anyway, so why spend your time? I mean, there's so many people, hopefully including yourself, who genuinely understand that change is required and who are genuinely trying to understand what to do. Focus on them. And when you've got all of them doing the right thing, the other people won't count. See, but excuse this sort of diversion, but it deals on a point which is actually applies to a number of the questions here. You know, it's this question: how do you get your conclusions about the world, about what's happening, what you need to do, and so forth? So there's sort of generally 2 ways to get conclusions. One way is that you decide what the important factors are, then you gather data about the factors to see what they're doing, and then you look at that and you decide what conclusions are justified. And if the data or the factors change for some reason, often you will have to change your conclusions. Some people do it the opposite way. They decide what conclusions they like, then they look around for the factors that will justify those conclusions, and then they find some data which somehow legitimate those factors. For those people, if the factors or the data change, they don't change their conclusions, they just change their data and their factors. This is the way I understand the current debate between the so-called climate scientists and the climate skeptics. The skeptics are fundamentally unwilling to accept the notion of climate change because they feel it would call forth measures, most especially governmental centralized control measures, that they don't like and find unacceptable. So rather than sort of get into that, they systematically do everything they can to prevent people from coming to the conclusion that the climate is changing. The climate skeptics, many of them, actually don't care about climate, really. They care about something else, and climate is an instrumental variable for them. So you have this incredibly frustrating debate now in the United States. The climate skeptic says climate isn't changing because the upper atmosphere is actually getting cooler. And then the scientists spend a lot of time and they come up with a model which explains what's really happening, reconciles the data, and says, no, actually that's totally consistent with climate change. And then the climate skeptic says, well, actually I don't really care about the upper atmosphere. Climate isn't changing because the polar bears are getting better off. You know, and you know, so, and then we do a study and say, no, the polar bears are in desperate straits. They're starving, they're, you know, etc. They get tired out, they drown because there's no ice anymore. And then the climate skeptic says, well, actually, I really don't care about polar bears. I care about ice. Ice is accumulating in Antarctica now. Did you know what it is? So that proves there's no climate change, so I don't worry about it. So you see, that's the way the debate unfolds. And if you get yourself involved in that debate, it's just futile. So, and the people who have habits, you know, characterized by that's what they're doing. So you're never going to win that argument. Don't get into it. Use your creative energies with the people who see that there's a problem and want to do something about it.
Well, there's one person here who does see this problem. How do you get the data for German happiness?
Well, let me, before I do, somebody said, you know, so what do I do? Well, there's no general answer to that question. I mean, I can give you some sort of generic responses, which are mainly designed to open up your thinking to do things to do. But what do you do depends on who you are, where you are, what kind of resources you have, how much time you have. Do you need to be paid, or you're willing to do this on a voluntary basis? You know, as all of that stuff. And so if we go through that conversation, then typically we can come up with something useful to do. But there's no, I can't tell you about some magic button, and if you all push it, then everything is going to be okay. Okay, what was the other question?
This question is, how do you find the data?
Oh, German happiness.
So German happiness is very important.
So, I never used that data before, and it's not my data, but when I saw that I was going to give a speech in Munich, I thought, well, I've got to do something that relates to Germany. So I went on the web and looked around, and I found it. I don't recommend that as the foundation for your scientific career. But it's not a bad way to prepare a speech. If someone is, so I mean, you know what you do, go into Google, type data on German happiness, and there it will be.
I'd like to make a few general remarks. The first one is that this discussion will go on until 8:15, so you get an idea of, we won't be able to have every question answered. However, we will publish every question so that you can write your book. We will publish all the questions. If you
publish it, then everybody will write their book, right?
Well, you have the first right. We will make that sure also. So we will publish all the questions in two places, on the website of the Rachel Carson Center, and also on the website of the Nachhaltigkeitsvorlesungsreihe, Leitbild Nachhaltigkeit, München minus something. You'll find it. Just Google it. Secondly, because I hope that you don't write all these emails, we will also publish the slides on the website, on both websites. And now, maybe because we already talked about German happiness, I can ask the few questions. There were only 3.5 questions that were asked actually of Hochdeutsch. And two of them are rather complex. One is very specific, and the third one is not quite German, but it's sort of Germanic. So the first one is very abstract, actually. Wie sollen solche, I know Dennis can speak German well, but wie sollen solche relativ abstrakten und komplexen Gedanken wie der wechselwirkende Systemkomponenten je von so vielen